What if I told you that there was a way to learn a second language that didn't involve any studying, but was way more effective than traditional methods? Well, that way actually exists. And the reason it's so effective is because it allows you to subconsciously acquire the language instead of consciously learning it. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the difference between acquiring and learning a language, explaining to you exactly how to acquire a language, and at the end of the video, I'm going to give you actionable steps so that once the video is over, you can start taking steps to acquire a language today. In his book, Principles and Practice in Second Language Acquisition, Dr. Stephen Krashen makes a distinction between acquiring and learning a second language. According to him, learning is a conscious process of accumulating knowledge about the language. In other words, it's what we typically think of when we think of learning a language. Think studying with textbooks, memorizing vocabulary, and doing grammar exercises. Acquiring, on the other hand, is a subconscious process, much like how children develop their first language. People who acquire languages are often not even aware that they're doing it because they're not focused on the language itself. Instead, they're just focused on trying to communicate. Now, the reason this distinction is so important is because acquiring results in fluency and learning doesn't. This means that if you want to be fluent in your target language, you have to acquire it. There's simply no other way. But how exactly do you do that?
We acquire language in one way and only one way, when we understand messages.
More specifically, we acquire language when we understand input, that is, things we read or listen to, that contains language which is just a little beyond our current level. This is known as comprehensible input. Now you might be wondering, how can I understand language which is beyond my current level? Well, that's where context clues and other information such as your knowledge of the world come into play. Let's try a little experiment. Yo tengo una cara. En mi cara tengo dos ojos, una nariz y una boca. Now, unless you already speak Spanish, you probably have no idea what I just said. So let's try again. Yo tengo una cara. En mi cara, yo tengo dos ojos, una nariz y una boca. What about this time? Did you understand what I said? I'm willing to bet that this time you understood everything that I said, even if you don't know any Spanish. This is what we mean by comprehensible input. It's input that you understand, even if you don't know all the words and phrases being used. So, to acquire a language, you need to get comprehensible input. But comprehensibility isn't the only requirement for input to be effective in helping us acquire a language. In fact, in his book, Dr. Krashen outlines 3 additional characteristics of optimal input for language acquisition. Number 1, the input must be interesting or relevant to you. Good input is focused on communicating a message. But if that message is boring or you don't care about it, it's not going to be very effective in helping you acquire the language. Ideally, the input should be so interesting that you're completely focused on understanding the message, so much so that you forget what language it's even being conveyed in. Number 2, the input is not grammatically sequenced. By this, Dr. Krashen means that the input doesn't need to be super finely tuned to your level, the way it is in textbooks, where, for example, a paragraph will contain exclusively words and phrases you already know, except for the one new grammar point it's trying to introduce in that chapter. Instead, the input only needs to be roughly tuned to your level. As long as you understand the message, your brain will naturally pick out and acquire the parts of language that it's ready to acquire. Number 3, the input is sufficient in quantity. In any piece of input, there will always be some sentences that you completely understand, and you won't acquire any language from those because you already know all of the language they contain. Likewise, there'll be other sentences that will be completely unknown to you, and you won't acquire any language from those because you won't even understand the message. However, what this point is saying is that as long as you get enough input, there will always be some, which is just the right level to allow you to understand the message and acquire new language. So in summary, in order to acquire a language, you need to get input that you both understand and find interesting, and you need to get as much of it as you possibly can. So now I'm going to give you actionable steps on how to start getting comprehensible input today at the beginner, intermediate, and advanced stages of language learning. The video chapters will be marked in the progress bar down below, so you can head down there and skip straight to the section with advice for the level you're currently at. As a beginner, there are two main ways that you can start getting comprehensible input. The first is to find a fluent speaker of your target language to be your language partner. This person's job will be to tell you stories in the language, using actions, drawings, magazines, and picture books as aids to help you understand what they're saying. At this stage in the process, you shouldn't be worried about trying to speak the language unless you feel ready. So when you're with your language partner, don't worry about replying to anything that they're saying. As long as you're listening to and understanding what they're saying to you, that's all that matters. There's actually a really great video on YouTube by polyglot and language teacher Jeff Brown, which explains how to learn with a language partner using this method much better than I ever could. So I'll link that video down in the description below. Now, if you don't have any fluent speakers of your target language in your area, there are websites that you can use to find a language partner to practice with over video call online. I do happen to have an affiliate link with my personal favorite one, which is italki. I've been using them for over 6 years, but I will link all of the ones I know of in the description below so that if you do decide to try this out, you can check all of them out and choose the one which you feel is best for you. The second way that you can get comprehensible input as a beginner is to use materials designed for beginners. Specifically on YouTube, there are quite a few channels who make content that's specifically designed to be comprehensible input for beginners. So if you just go to the YouTube search bar and you put comprehensible input for beginners and then the name of your language, for most major languages, you'll be able to find quite a bit of content. There are also some input-based language learning softwares like Link and LingoPie, which do have content targeted specifically towards beginners. So I'll link those down in the description below as well. Now, obviously, the ideal scenario for a beginner is to have a language partner and then supplement the work you do with your language partner by getting additional comprehensible input online. But since not everyone has access to a language partner and some people are also just shy, I do think that getting all of your comprehensible input by consuming content online is also a perfectly valid way to progress in this stage. As an intermediate, you should be starting to tailor your input more to your own interests. At this level, you can start using lower level native content, which naturally includes a lot of visual aids. For example, tutorials are a really good one, like yoga, exercise, makeup, cooking tutorials, because what's being said is usually also being shown on screen at the same time. Another good one is house tours. And anything with babies or young children in it is also going to be good because it will inevitably include adults who are speaking the way that they would usually speak to children, which is usually a version of their speech modified intentionally to make it more comprehensible for the child and therefore for you. This is also a really good level to start leaning into input-based language learning softwares like Link and LingoPie. If you don't know what those are, they're basically softwares that allow you to read something or watch a show in your target language with target language subtitles, but it allows you to click on the words and will give you the translation in your native language. This can make content which would have otherwise been out of reach for you more comprehensible. So I'll leave the links for some of those down in the description below. Once you get to a more upper intermediate level, you can also start incorporating a bit more advanced content that you've already consumed before in your native language. For example, many people like to reread Harry Potter in the language that they're learning because they're already so familiar with the story, it makes guessing new words and phrases from context a little bit easier. Finally, having a language partner is still going to be super useful at this stage. You should be starting to feel a bit more ready to start speaking the language now. So if you want, you can have more two-directional conversations with your language partner. Obviously though, you're not going to be as reliant on them now as you were in the beginner stages because you have access to a lot more content now which is comprehensible to you. At the advanced level, you're going to want to start consuming content in your target language similar to what you usually consume in your native language. So for example, if you usually like to watch shows on Netflix, start looking for a good show in your target language, or if you prefer to read fiction, see if you can find something interesting for you to read. That being said, it's important to remember in this step that not all native content is made equal. For example, even if you're interested in politics and current events, jumping straight into watching news broadcasts is probably not the best idea, as they can be pretty difficult to understand, even for native speakers. Instead, you could find a podcast which discusses the same types of topics and listen to that for a while to develop your competence in the language before moving on to news broadcasts. A good general rule to understand in this regard is that casual conversational style content like vlogs and podcasts are almost always easier to understand than scripted content. This is because with scripted content, words are carefully chosen to convey the meaning as efficiently as possible. This means that you really need to pay close attention and make sure you're understanding everything in order to follow along. On the other hand, in more conversational style content, the speakers are usually vocalizing their flow of thought as it happens, which means that they can tend to take longer to speak or repeat things that they've already said. This can make it quite a bit easier to understand. Of course, I'm not saying you should avoid scripted content altogether. I'm just saying that this is helpful to remember as a general rule, so that if you find yourself struggling with more scripted content, you can fall back on something more conversational for a while to develop your language competence to a point at which you can understand scripted content more easily. Alright guys, I really hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to subscribe because I have a bunch more other videos that I also hope will be really helpful coming out soon. Also, I would love to know what languages you guys are learning, so please let me know in the comments down below. I've been Sunny and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!